What if I could show you how to double your speed of reading and double your comprehension of what you're reading as well? Would you be interested? If you are, keep watching. Most men I know would rather be outside using their hands or in their shed making something than sitting down and reading a book. Most people who have tried to sit down and read a book will probably feel drowsy and fall asleep or nearly asleep after just a few pages. Others will get into a zone where they read a book, they read a page, and they get to the end of that page and they go, "What have I just read?" If this is you, if any of these describe you, I've got something that I think will help you to not only read better, but to enjoy reading better. If you're a Christian, reading is a part of your spiritual discipline. In fact, the relationship between reading and Christianity goes right back to its foundation. Jesus often said, "As it is written." And we have Christianity from its earliest days known as a religion of the book. And through the Middle Ages, that was one of the designations that distinguished Christianity and Judaism from other religions. Christianity was a religion of the book. In fact, wherever Christianity spread, it also introduced literacy. Sometimes missionaries would go in and give a native speaking people group their language. They would give them their language in literature. In other words, teach them to be able to write and read their own language. And by doing this, they were then able to translate the Bible into their language so that they could read it. So reading and literature is a really important relationship with Christianity. In fact, if we think about the Christian disciplines, things like prayer, things like fasting, things like worship and fellowship, we also have to include Bible reading and Bible study as a part of it. So, knowing how to read and to read well is really important for not just your intellect, but the condition of your soul. And this is why I think there's 4 things that I'd like to show you that will help you to read better. So I want to give you 4 tips that I think will help you to improve your reading, to enjoy your reading, to double your reading speed, and also to double your comprehension of a book. The first tip of my 4 tips is always get an idea of what a book is about before you start reading it. So for example, here's a book that I recently read. It's called Weathering Climate Change, A Fresh Approach. It's by Dr. Hugh Ross, and it was a really, really good book. But here's the first thing I do. Look at the cover. They say never judge a book by its cover, but I have a look at the cover so I get an idea of what it's about. I'll go to the back. I'll see oftentimes a summary of the book, and if it's not a summary by the author or the publisher, oftentimes it's a recommendation by someone, in this instance Dr. Michael Strauss, who has basically in his acclamation of the book given a brief summary of what the book's about. Then if I don't know the author and I want to know where the author's coming from, there's a little bit of information here, only a few sentences, so I can read that. The next thing to do to get an idea of what the book is about, there'll be people that say this is a great book, this is, those sorts of things. I move past that. I see the cover page, I've got the cover page, but then this thing here, which you may gloss over initially, is the table of contents. It's actually really important to get an idea of where this book is going and what it's all about. So that's that. That's the table of contents, and that now I can see the 22 chapters in this book. This book I think is designed for men to read because the chapters are really incredibly short. They're only a couple of pages, so it's really helpful. Then there's some things, list of figures and tables and things. I don't need to know that. Acknowledgements, I don't really need to know that. Preface, I don't really need to know that, although it might be helpful if the book is going to have a preface that kind of tells me what it's about. Then what you could even do is just take a book like this and just simply flick through the pages to see where it's going, what it's about. Does it have headings? And you might think, well, what's the value of headings? Headings often give you a clue as to where the book is going, what it's about, and enable you to get an idea. So that's the first thing I would do, and I would suggest what I've just done now, and that was the first chapter, by the way. I've just skimmed through it, and I would suggest you actually just skim through the whole, like literally just skim through, see where it's going. Now the reason that's important is because your brain then becomes familiar with the content of the book. So I'm not talking about novels. Novels are different. I'm talking about that these are non-fiction books or books about facts. So that's the first thing. Here's my second tip. My second tip, you might have noticed that in this book I've got a lot of sticky notes. And what I've done on these sticky notes is I've written comments. Now, if the book had a wide enough margin, I would have probably written in the side of the margin, but in this instance the margin is quite small, quite narrow. But here's what happens to your brain when you do things like this. Put a sticky note in with a comment on the sticky note. What your brain is now doing for you is engaging with the book. And when you're engaging with the book, you automatically are going to improve your retention, your memory, your comprehension of the content of the book. The other thing you might notice is that I've got highlights here. So there's yellow and orange, and I'll talk about those in a moment. But as we go through here, you might see that I've also used a pen. Don't often use a pen, and this is why I would say if you want to improve your reading, the first thing is never borrow a book. Never accept a book that someone is lending you. Always get your own book, because as you can see, by the time I'm finished with a book, I've written on it, I've highlighted it, I've put sticky notes in it, and so on. So there are some books that I don't do that to. That's my F.W. Boren book collection. I wouldn't dare do that. But these, in this instance, I'm writing in it, I'm engaging with the book, and that's an important part of the process. You might think, well, that would take me too long. And here's the problem for a lot of people. They actually think that everyone else reads faster than them. And what I want to show you is that people actually don't generally read very fast and comprehend what they're reading unless they have really, really practiced. So if you're starting out, and you may have been reading for decades, but now some of this information might be new to you, and it's going to take a bit of practice. But here's what I'm going to recommend. Don't try and read too much. So this is all a part of my second tip. Essentially, if I was to give it a title, would be always read with a pencil. So I always have a pencil. In fact, oftentimes when I'm reading different books, I keep the pencil in where I'm reading. And that pencil then becomes my bookmark, and it also becomes the thing where I can underline and take notes. Now, underlining and taking notes is a really important way to engage with the book. Again, what it's doing is it's taking your brain and it's teaching your brain, this is friendly material. This is material I want you to file away so that I can come back to it. All right, I said I use highlighters. I actually use highlighters very, very specifically, and I want to recommend to you, if you're a student, you're studying for exams, whether you're in university, college, or whether you're doing your upper level high school, year 11 and 12, something like that, I would recommend always use a pencil. If it's a textbook that you intend to sell, you probably don't want to mark your book. But using highlighters and using different colours, and I'll just pull out the colours, some of the colours, in fact I'll pull out all the colours that I use. I should have pulled these out earlier so that you get an idea of what I'm doing here. So the colour system that I use is, and this works for reading Christian books or non-Christian books, doesn't matter, but the pink highlighter I will use whenever there is a scripture passage. So when there's a scripture passage, I will highlight that in with pink. And so this is a particularly science book, so there's not a lot of scripture in it, but there is some, but I would use pink. And again, what that does to the brain is it causes the brain to hold that information just a little bit stronger than you would if you just read it. The other thing is I'll use a green highlighter, and here's an example of the green highlighter, where if there's a quote, so in other words the author is quoting someone, I will highlight that quote in green. Then the orange and the yellow are used to highlight things that stand out to me, things that I think are important. So looking at the headers, looking at keywords, so the pencil, another book I'm reading at the moment, I'm reading and I think that's a key word, so I just underline that word. And so use marking up a book. In fact, in a moment I'm going to talk about one of the world's leading experts on how to read, and he says the very first thing anyone should do when they're reading is to use a pencil. Now here's the other reason why. When you read, your brain is capable of making 800 decisions a second. In fact, it's a lot more than that actually. But let's be conservative. 800 decisions a second, per second. And that means that if you're reading and you're only putting in, say, 14 words a line, that may be 100 things you're asking your brain to do in a second, roughly. That means your brain has 700 unused capability per second. So that's why you'll get to the end of a page and you'll find that your mind has wandered off somewhere else. But what happens is when you use a pencil, and if you haven't got a pencil, it works with your finger, is to use your finger or a pencil to point at what you're reading. Now, what this will automatically do is double your speed in reading, and it'll also double your comprehension of what you're reading just by doing something as simple as a pencil or a finger. Now you might think, oh, I did that when I was in prep, when I was 5 years old. The teacher taught me to point at the word and read. And then somehow in elementary or primary school we were told, don't point at the words, you're a big kid now, you don't need to point at the words. And I'm telling you, point at the words. Use a pencil, use a finger, because it helps your brain, because our brain is wired that wherever we point, it gets our attention. So when you point, your brain is doubling its ability to concentrate on what you're reading. So try it, see how you go. I think you'll find it's helpful. Here's the third tip. The third tip in reading a non-fiction book, so again, not about a novel or a story, is to ask questions. Ask questions of the book. Ask questions of what you're reading. Here's the first question you would ask. All right, this book's about weathering climate change, a fresh approach. So here's my first question. What's this book about? Well, I've answered it. I think it's about understanding the science of climate change. So now I'm reading this and I'm asking other questions apart from what's the author trying to say. So when I started out reading this book, I didn't know where the author was going. I didn't quite know whether he was a climate change denier, whether he was someone who was all science and no economics. I didn't know where he was coming from. So what I'm asking is, where is he going? What is this about? So I'm asking questions. And then at some point, as I get toward the end of the book, or maybe at the end of the book, I'm going to ask another couple of questions. Did he make his case? And then the next question is, do I agree with his case? Is his case convincing? All right, so there's some questions. Ask questions of the book. And by doing that, you're engaging with the book. And that helps you to retain more. It helps you to absorb more of its information. And here's my fourth tip. And you may have found this already. My fourth tip is this. When you're reading a book, tell someone after you've read a portion, and it may be that you just simply read a page. In fact, your brain has the capacity to focus on something for about 10, and if you practice, 15 minutes. And that's about it. 10, 15 minutes. So if you're someone who thinks I have to sit down and grab an hour to read a book, you actually probably don't. You're probably beating yourself up a bit there. If you can grab 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes at the most, just as you start out doing this, you're going to find that you are able to maximize what you're reading. Right, so there's that. But then, here's how you seal the deal. you've read that 10 minutes, you go home, you see your husband, your wife, whatever, your children, your friends. You know, today I read da 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 da. So I read that Dr. Hugh Ross said that climate change is not a simple thing, and many people are making it a simple thing. And that is actually one of the things that he says. And he makes a whole host of scientific statements that I learnt from reading this. And I learnt that the issue of climate change is certainly not a simple matter. It's actually quite a complex matter, and it requires a whole host of simplistic, or simple rather, solutions. Not just one thing. It's not just one thing that's going to solve the climate change problem. All right. So by telling someone what you've read, you're actually sealing the deal, and it helps you to remember what you've read. Now, if you're interested in becoming an even better reader, in my next video, I'm going to talk about a book that I strongly recommend. Here's the original of that book. It's called How to Read a Book. I treasure this. This was published, I think, in 1938, and this is one of the original editions of it. It's by an author by the name of Mortimer J. Adler. Now, you can't get that. I had to get that on eBay from somewhere overseas just to get the original. And as you can see, that book did not look like that before I got it, and now it travelled with me literally around the world as I was devouring it. It looks like this now, and there's a co-author as well, Charles Van Doren, who wrote with Mortimer J. rewrote this book just not long before Mortimer J. Adler passed away. So if you're interested in learning how to read even better, then you probably want to watch my next video. But I hope these 4 tips help you to at least begin to dive back in and become a better reader.